welcome back to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. Today we got myself, Bryan. Also with me is Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And Ford.
Hey, what's going on?
And today we're talking about planning and how planning helps reduce stress. So what's that look like? Planning to reduce stress.
It's one of those things for me. I'm not, we talk about it. I'm not a huge planner. I don't work that way. I don't lay out a lot of plans. I'd say that all the time. Ironically, I look at it and I actually plan a lot. I'm very cognizant of what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, schedule wise. I don't necessarily write it down, and that's probably that I don't like people being able to hold me to it. But it doesn't mean I don't plan. And I think it's one of the things we really need to work on as a group, because if you at least have a plan for how you're going to approach a given situation, then you can be a little calmer as the situation unfolds. It doesn't have to be a situation you knew was going to occur, but being ready to talk to an owner or a GC, a client, an employee, if you have a little bit of a plan of how you're going to approach it, it just makes it easier to do it, and reduces the stress that you feel about doing it.
Well, and I think the one thing about this one in particular, as a conversation we're having, is that this one isn't one we're telling people. This is one that we're constantly working on ourselves. This is across the board. This is not, hey, we do it great, good luck, everybody. This is literally something that it's a constant improvement process for us because, planning, my calendar's full of all the events I have to do or the meetings I have to be in or stuff like that. But as far as planning, not high on my list either. And so that's something that is one of those things you have to work on, as you see weaknesses in something that you do and it's something that's valuable, you have to spend time working on being better at things like that. Because if you don't, then, you're constantly coming back to the exact same spot over and over again.
Yeah, about a month ago, we had a discussion at our foreman meeting, and I brought up this Eisenhower matrix that I like to use, and I use it internally as a mechanism, but I made a decision I would make it a little more outward. I have it up in my office. I went over it with the foreman just to sort of see. It's just another way of planning, is if you have a plan for at least how you're going to define any situation you run into. You're going to, in that matrix, is it urgent or important or not urgent or not important or any combination thereof. And then based on where you place it, then, you make a decision on how you react and how you move forward in approaching that decision. And so that's something that I brought up to them. And I really wanted everybody to see it sort of to give them a framework to be able to say, here's how Dan approaches making decisions. And here's how I try and mitigate stress and reduce my feeling of feeling pressure to make a decision by knowing that the decision's coming.
The other thing I think is too that, the last 2 years has really transitioned and put a spotlight on this in particular, because everything up until this point was basically ready when needed. That was kind of the thought process. You didn't call for the pipe until the day before you needed it. You didn't call for the stone till, the day of, or the concrete or the material. I mean, especially in the material world, but, pickup trucks, we can't find pickup trucks, whatever it is. Before, you basically just drove down to the lot and said, okay, I'll take that one, and drove home with it. And that's how everything was built, was they have this term for it for in the manufacturing, what is it?
Kaizen, just in time.
Just in time delivery, right? And so that's what the whole world up until the last 2 years has really trained us to do, was to basically be okay, just when you need it, you deal with it, but not until then. And this has really kind of flipped us back to a different time frame when there is planning that needs to be done. And the one thing with planning in my mind is that there's a plan A, but there also has to be in the back of your brain, plan B, C, maybe all the way up to Z, depending on the project. But, you make a plan and then you have to be able to adjust it, but at least you have thought through the different variables in a way to make it as functional as possible, even if you hit a roadblock on one of those plans.
Yeah. And sort of piggyback on that, the way I approach it myself is I have a solution in mind, right? And it might be one or two solutions that outcomes that I think could happen. And so for me, the plan A, B, C is just trying to determine how I can get to that outcome, or any number of outcomes that might be possible. And then that's the planning for me. That's how I approach it. That's how I settle myself down. I say, this is where we're going to go. This is, where we need to be. We've talked a lot, at this time of year, we always do, but we're talking a lot about growth and bringing on new employees. And so that's part of the process here, is that, having discussion with the project managers and the estimators and the rest of the team and saying, okay, how many people do we need? Because if we need one guy, one person, well, okay, that's a very specific thing I'm looking for. That's one way that I'm going to approach it. If you need 5 guys or 10 guys or 15 guys, you have to approach that differently from a process standpoint, from a planning standpoint. Um, and so that's another example for me of something that I'm dealing with right now is I had to get out in front of that and get the team to say, this is how many people we think we need. And then I can act in a way to try and get them those people, try and facilitate things to happen and plan so that we can bring on people. It doesn't mean we'll get to the right number, but it certainly reduces the stress for me, at least, once we have a number and we know this is the number of people we're trying to hire. And okay, let's go do that. It gives you a target that you can aim at.
Right. And I think the other thing that we do is like we have a yearly planning for like at the management level, we'll call it, right? And we have this meeting and we create what we call rocks, which are like things that we're going to do over the year. And up until this point, basically the rock for me sat in my desk, and the week before the next meeting, it was like, okay, let me run around, chicken my head cut off and try and get that done so that when we have the meeting, it'll be done. It's just, that was the way of doing it before. That was that when needed, it was ready to go. But until that point, nah, nothing. And so that's part of the thing of like trying to do that now a little bit better. And, Dylan came on the other day and he asked me a question. He's like, what's the 5-year plan for Berg Construction? And I had an answer for him, but I don't know that it came out as concrete as it did because I was like, control growth to be able to do it in a systematic way. But then at the same time, there's a caveat that if a really cool opportunity comes on, we might try and like go after it too. So it kind of sounded like I was coming out of both sides of my mouth. But what the reality was in my mind was that like the main goal is that we're going to have systems in place. We're going to do it in a controlled way that is good for the company financially, for the health of the team members, things like that. But we're always looking if there's something interesting that we might have to make it a stretch goal, we'll call it, something that's a little bit bigger outside of the norm. And so, that was one of those things where it was like, okay, we have a plan, but we also have a plan B and maybe a plan C if things get there. But that's, there's so many different levels of planning. It's the day-to-day planning. It's the month-long planning, looking out ahead on a job site. It's the 5-year plan from, a management level, trying to make sure that we put the right pieces in place. So there's just planning everywhere, down to the, which piece of pipe you're going to put in or today, even if you have multiple jobs to do at the same time, you got to figure out which one you're going to do. So planning is everywhere. It's just the fact that like trying to identify it and actually spend the time to do it versus, reacting.
Yeah, well, I think one of the hardest parts about planning is the execution piece. I mean, it's really easy to write stuff down and say, this is our plan. I think we all do it, right? In some form or fashion, whether it's a scratch paper, whether it's your Outlook calendar, it's your cell phone, whatever it might be. We all make great plans, right? But the execution piece is where most people struggle. Can we actually accomplish these things? Did we put them into steps where we could do this? Is it realistic? Is it achievable? Is it measurable? And those are typically the answers that people struggle with. I don't know how you guys are. I've got reminders that go off on my phone every single day, right? And when I made those reminders, they were very meaningful to me. They were things that I wanted to like keep as a focus in front of mind and make sure that they were, purposeful to how I was either living my life or my daily routine or whatever. And now I pretty much snooze those every day. It doesn't mean they're any less important or meaningful, but I don't know that that piece of planning is effective, so to speak, because I'm not necessarily executing on what I believed my plan was. So that's one of the hardest parts. I know that one of the things that from a superintendent level has become a focus for us recently is sort of that 2-week look ahead, right? That idea that we're trying to all stay on the same page, that someone of some level of authority knows what each person is trying to accomplish in the next 14 business days or 14 calendar days to 10 business days. So that from a planning perspective, we can try and hold each other accountable. And I think that's a big chunk of it, at every level of planning. What's the accountability component? Who are you accountable to? Is there a failure and is there a fail safe?
Well, I mean, that's very simple. It's like, I think if you don't plan and you don't have metrics to check yourself to, you're not held liable. You did not do it. I mean, for me, it's like, weight loss, right? Like, oh, I'm going to do that, but I don't really have a plan. Like, I didn't like spell it out. And so that way, if I don't do it, I didn't really
Right.
break anything because I didn't really put it down in the first place.
Yeah, if you don't write it down or have someone who's holding you accountable to your goal, is it really even a goal? So
Right. It's like, that doesn't, the, what do they call it? The New Year's resolution. You do it. And you're like, okay, that's cool. And then you just kind of like 3 months later, like, oh yeah, didn't really get there. All right.
yeah, 3 months, you're doing good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bryan, it comes to mind. I read a book, and then I said something to you, and I think it really struck a chord with you as well. There was this book, Atomic Habits. And we might have even talked about it before on the podcast, and it said if you build a trigger to trigger another habit, and if we stay with weight loss, like for me, that's waking up early and working out. It triggers a bunch of other things. I'm not going to wake up and work out and not have a smoothie. Like that's going to happen. I will make the smoothie before I leave for work if I work out. If I don't work out, I'll be like, you know what? I'm running a little late. I don't have time to work out. I'm going to stop at Wawa and get a smoothie. Now, little to no difference, except the Wawa smoothie is all sugar, right? So I've effectively still had the smoothie, or maybe I won't even do that. And then I'm going to be hungry. So it triggers all these other things. And it gets to mind what you said about the, setting the reminders. It's something I tend not to do, except long term. Like, and the one that came to mind when you said it actually is, and I did it, was I set a reminder for, I think, April 4th or something. And I did it last year to remind me that you have to make a reservation for Mother's Day brunch. Because if you don't, all of a sudden it's a week before Mother's Day and you're scrambling to try and figure out where you're going to take your family for brunch, which my wife likes to do on Mother's Day. And so I literally last Mother's Day made a reminder that said, I have to do this, but I don't do it like daily, like remind me to do this tomorrow. I'll do it, but it's like you said, you tend to snooze it because it's not enough of a trigger. It becomes noise.
Mm.
And so I think that is really important as we're planning, at our team level for what we're going to do, the crew makeup, the equipment, the pipe, what are you ordering, is to make the plans something that are concrete, measurable, and achievable. Because that's another discussion we've had, never on the podcast, but we've all talked about it as a group, is people make unachievable plans. They make a plan that, okay, so the one that comes to mind, Bryce, there was, I don't know when it was, but I had made a schedule for myself one day, and you heard me doing it. And you were like, I feel like you keep saying you can do this other meeting. Yes, I can be here. Yes, I can be here. And he said, and you said to me, have you looked at your schedule for that day? And it was a couple days ahead of me. And I was like, nah, I mean, yeah, it's busy, but it's not bad. And at the end of the day, I went to look at it, and I had made agreed to go to meetings one on top of another, and they weren't even in the same location. Like it wasn't even feasible. There was no way this was going to happen. And so I had
Did you have a jetpack or something you're going to use?
Well, it's white. I have one. But it was one of those things where you can unconsciously do it just because you're agreeing to try and, solve someone else's problem, meet their need. You're trying to do the right thing. But in doing it, you make an unachievable goal. So my intention was to attend all those things, but it was never going to happen. And so that's really key, I think, as we work on planning as a team, is make the goals that you're trying to set achievable, make the plan achievable, make it something your team can do and that's in your control. So you can't guarantee that you can put in precast if you don't know the lead time on the precast. You know what I mean? You can't guarantee to start a job if we don't have a crew to start the job. There's just things you can't do.
Well, I think it also really comes into play right now. We have a couple of these jobs where, unfortunately, the client's schedule is unrealistic and they're putting a lot of pressure on us to like make magic happen. And even though it's not really, it becomes our responsibility, even though it's not our problem, shall we say. And they just constantly like, oh, we need more done, more done, more done. And it's like, yeah, but there's it's not an infinite amount of time. There's not an infinite amount of labor hours. There's not an infinite amount of equipment. Like we have to do it in a planned format. And, that really puts a lot of stress on people because they're getting stress from the people on management in the field from the client and different things. And that's part of like where this really comes in and gets people, towards the end of each job, people get wound up because they're trying to get things done that maybe should have been done before, things of that nature, not even from us, but just as far as the client in general that happens. And so, us planning helps us communicate to the client early enough on that hopefully we can try and negate some of these challenges where it gets to the end of the job and everyone's just scrambling.
Yeah, you know what else I was thinking about, Ford? We were out at a meeting with a group of other excavation contractors, and one of them said, he was talking about a particular job, and he said, it was very complicated. It was all these things. And he said, and I told the owner, I said, anything can be done. It just, it costs a certain amount of money. It needs a certain amount of planning. You could do anything. There's almost no job that we've ever approached that we couldn't do what the owner wanted. The question is, could we do it in the time frame they wanted and for the money they wanted? And, that's where planning from like an estimator standpoint is just huge. Because if as long as the owner knows what it's going to cost and agrees to do it and can agree to the time frame, we can accomplish almost anything. When we get into trouble is when there's a disconnect between us and an owner on what they either think the time frame is or what they think is the scope is included in our costs. And when there's a lack of clarity there and a miscommunication, you end up in a lot of trouble that feels stressful to everybody. But if you had planned and addressed it initially, you probably could have avoided it either by addressing it or by not doing the job because it was an unrealistic time frame or an unrealistic scope.
Well, and I think they drive that even more now, all these schedules. Like we were talking to these other contractors in other places, and they had they're seeing these schedules like start tomorrow as soon as we award the job, and you got 90 days to get the job done, right? Like they're just asking for more and more and more to see what till somebody breaks is really what it boils down to. And so having a realistic understanding of what can be done in a day. And the other thing is you have a plan for a day. Say you're going to put X amount of feet of pipe in, but maybe you have a stretch goal and you want to, say you want to put 200 in, and maybe you can get 220, and you want to try and, push yourself to the best that you can be. So sometimes you got to try and work a little extra to get to that point there. So that's why it's always good to have the attainable goal, and then maybe a goal that, if you have a great day, you can get a little bit past that too. So it's always trying to make a balance because it's, plans are usually based on averages at most points.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, and I sort of wrote this down when we were going to talk about it, there's the old adage about it. You either failing to plan, right? You're
Failing
either
to
going
plan is planning to fail.
Failing to plan is planning to fail. So it is funny though that we're having this discussion, and that Ford and I are more vocal in this. When you put the three of us in a room, and anybody that knows us know Bryan plans more than
because the planner's just in here going I've been telling you guys this for a while. Thank goodness you're admitting to it. Now I can hold you accountable because you said it on the podcast.
You can try to hold us accountable.
Yeah, that's what I'm really there is no accountability mechanism here. So. Yeah, something you said was really interesting there. Just I saw a presentation. This is a long time ago, so I'll forget most of the details. But it was Andy Stanley. He's a pastor for a big church, but he was talking about relationships specifically, but the the buckets of stuff that we all carry around, right? And that's any relationship. It's not just a romantic relationship with a spouse or significant other. It's any relationship. And that relationship we have with our clients, with owners, with GCs is an ever-changing dynamic where, where everyone approaches with these buckets of expectations and wants and needs. And somewhere in those is what is the reality. And the hardest piece to flesh it out at times is that reality, because their expectations don't always align with even the wants and needs, and certainly at times not the reality of what can be accomplished in a given period of time, a given budget, etc. So yeah, so that's always a fine line that you have to walk, and finding that balance requires a lot of communication, which is, in essence, a form of planning, being verbal about what's supposed to happen, when it'll happen, and coming to some type of formal agreement. Every project starts with a plan, right? Even at the bid, when we make a bid, a lot of times they want to know the plan, right? And so we give them these nice, colorful Gantt charts, and do something pretty in project, and say, hey, on day 75 we're going to do this, and on day 79 we'll be done with that and doing this, and the reality is, that creates an expectation of whether or not it's achievable. And then when real life happens, we're stuck in a spot where have we communicated clearly and adjusted to the plan? Like you said, Ford, is there a B, C, D, etc. It's in an effort to make sure that it doesn't create unnecessary friction in that relationship. So.
Well, one more story that I have for this is that it goes back to snow. So when we look at a new site, they usually give us a spec sheet of what they want done. But we've learned over the years, I don't care about the spec sheet because there's a written down what they want, and then there is a expectation of what they want. And we learned this years ago at Merck, like, do this, do this, do this, do it in this order. So we did it in that order, and they were not very happy. We couldn't figure out why. Well, here there was this little back door area behind a building that the executives used for their smoke breaks. That wasn't on any paperwork, wasn't told to us, anything like that. But that area didn't get cleared till like the third level according to our plan. So we were following our plan and didn't do it. But their executives were upset because that area wasn't done. So once we learned that was an important thing, that was one of the first things that got done. And all of a sudden they got caught. They were not as upset about how the speed of the clearing was happening. So now when we see a new site, it's like, okay, we want to go around, we want to see what your requirements are, but then we want to talk to whoever is in charge because there's going to be things that are not written down that we need to listen when they speak because there's something that they're saying. What they're saying might not match what's on the spec sheet. And so we really have to listen to what they're saying because that's what they're actually going to judge us on, not on that spec sheet. That is just a generic centralized thing. It's more about those things, those little soft things that they didn't deem important enough to write down, but it's very important to them, even if it's not on their plan.
What's funny for it is I'll stick with snow here, but bring it much more current with Vanguard. That when we got to Vanguard, the planning, and they had everything laid out. They had a perfect plan. It was not achievable, likely, and was probably not going to happen. But the first snowstorm occurred on a weekday. It's not ideal. I'd like it to be a weekend. That way there's less people around. We can sort of figure it out. And there's three things I remembered from that first snowstorm. One, we realized that they didn't care that a machine could clear faster than X amount of people. They wanted to physically see the people. So we were going to have to change this and our equipment wouldn't work. We were going to have to find a labor source and physically have people shovel, even though we could have done it with the machines because that's what they wanted to see. But the two more important takeaways were, number one, if they're planning, multiple levels, multiple companies of planning to get us to what the plan was. They failed to tell us that there was an executive board meeting that all the executive board of Vanguard were at 7 a.m.
That morning.
And then to compound that, they handed us all these perfectly drawn, amazingly illustrated maps that didn't have building names on them. And so Vanguard names all their buildings. And so they said, go to, I'm not going to throw out Vanguard's building names, but they said, go to this building, this building, this building. And I was like, okay, I don't know where that building is. Like, I don't know what building you're talking about. Like, if you would have said, go to the intersection of the gate and the building to the left, I could have gotten everybody to that building, but you didn't. You said some name that means nothing to me. So on their plan, it was a perfect plan. Everybody knows where that building is because that's where the CEO's office is, except someone who doesn't work at Vanguard and doesn't know where the CEO's office is. And so I had no idea where that building was. And they came back to me 2 hours later and they said, you still haven't gotten to that building. And they're really mad. I was like, well, can somebody show me where the building is? I thought we cleared, by your map, I cleared where you said was most important because their map identified where people would be, not where an executive would look if there happened to be a board meeting on a snowstorm because they hadn't planned for that. And that was much newer. And a lot of the guys on the team are here. They would remember that from last year, or 2 years ago, whatever it was. But it was just funny because after all that planning of multiple, management companies, Vanguard, they didn't put the name of the buildings on there.
Because to them, they were there. So like their expectations are that that's something that everybody knows, right, except for new people on the site.
Yeah.
So the plan can fail.
The plan can fail. You just got to adjust.
Right.
But the more you plan, the less stress you feel about it. Like in that scenario of Vanguard, the example I could give is I was not super stressed about them being upset because I just said, guys, we had a plan. I tried to approach the plan. You failed to tell us there was an executive board meeting and you didn't write the names of the buildings on your map. I had no way to know where I was going to go or that I should have been there on that particular day because you didn't tell me. And I said that in a meeting with those people. And all of a sudden they all looked at each other and realized like, okay, they didn't get it done, but they were also a little bit handicapped. And so I wasn't as stressed about it.
But in the moment we took responsibility.
Yeah.
We reacted.
We
got the problem solved.
Yeah. I apologized. I said, we're doing the best we can. We'll
Right.
figure it out.
And then in
we'll-
hindsight, we revisited the plan and said it was not easily executed because it lacked information.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that that is a perfect example of having to adjust on the fly, but we had a plan. And the other part is too, sometimes there is some minor safety. Isn't going to get it done. But there is safety if you're if you're following the plan that you put out there, and it might not be what something else wants, but if they saw the plan and they knew that you're doing the plan, they will understand that you're following a process. And so they will work with you a little bit more. If they just think you're kind of like jumping around, then they're going to try and inject themselves into your plan. But if you have a plan that's laid out and everyone's aware of it, and you're showing that you're following those steps, then there is a certain amount of they have to let that plan follow through because they understood it, they saw it, they agreed to it. And so they're going to let it happen the way that you had drawn it out.
I mean, that's a great point. The safety component of planning, probably goes beyond a lot of the things that we're considering is if you fail to acknowledge the things that you're going to have to do, how can you be prepared to do them in a safe manner or have the appropriate equipment? So, that's one of the things that look ahead report that Scott Gross is working through is like, did you know you needed to have respirators on site today? Or did you know you had to be prepared with the appropriate safety equipment for the task you're going to do? And did that delay it being, done appropriately or at the right time? Did you attempt to shortcut it and put yourself or someone else at risk? So, yeah.
Yeah. Just yesterday, I was out at one of our sites. I was out at the landfill site. And when you talk about planning, part of planning is just seeing it happen, seeing when it actually works, when the plan is operating and functioning. And yesterday I sat there for probably 20 minutes, like looking, and I wasn't counting load counts. I wasn't doing any of those things. I was literally just looking at how efficiently this plan was working, like that it was working exactly the way it was drawn up. I mean, there was 4 dozers, 5 trucks, 2 excavators, a roller and a supervisor, and everybody was doing exactly what they were supposed to do. And it was like a symphony. Like it was just, trucks were never caught. They were just passing each other. One was empty, one was full. The thing was loading, all the equipment running, and it was running perfectly. 4 days ago, everybody was all stressed out because it was chaos because a roller went down, which that's a key piece on 1/3 of this. It's an export, it's an import, it's a stockpile. There's a lot of things going on, but one of the main pieces is they're building this berm and they need the roller to compact the berm so we can pass our nuke testing. And so, they called me and they were in a panic and what are we going to do? And I said to them, well, we can't have a second roller sitting there. Like that's not what they paid for. And they gave you their roller because we're working for an owner who has a roller. They're running their own, landfill, and their roller broke down. I was like, so really we don't have that much culpability here. Like my roller broke down. I couldn't have anticipated that. You were good enough to lend us your roller, which broke down. So I really can't anticipate that. And we said we would have a roller there by the end of the day. Now it changed the plan in that moment, but to Ford's point, they had a plan. We were working through that plan. Something came up, and you just have to acknowledge that you have a plan and then stick to that and stay that course and say, this is the plan. We're going to do the best we can to get back to that plan, but it allows you to be a little less stressed. Now, if you just showed up and you're like, oh, a roller, I didn't think I was going to need a roller. Well, now there's going to be a lot of stress because you have no defense. You didn't plan, so planning is key because it gives you a stance and a position that you can defend to say, this is why we're doing what we're doing.
Nice. I think that planning is one of those topics where it's a constant work in process, right? We will constantly be trying to find the right tool for planning, the right strategy, and the right way to take responsibility and action as an owner when the plan doesn't work. So we could probably talk about this one for a long time, but it seems like a good place to wrap it up. So thanks for joining us, folks. We hope to catch you again sometime soon.